Welcome, I'm Darren, and I'll be your guide today as I look at the 1991-92 Pinnacle hockey card release. Originally, I was going to talk about the 91 set and then also the 92-93 set. I was going to do both of them together, but I found that I was looking at about a half-hour long video and I just figured, you know what, that's just not worth it. So I'm breaking them up, and that means that this is going to be this is already a long enough video that it's perfectly fine, but I do feel like I'd like to do this as a lead into the 92 set. So that's going to bug me, but I'm assuming I'm the only person who's going to be bugged by it. So I'll look at 92 in a separate video, but for the 91-92 set, well, here we go. And this is pretty cool. For Pinnacle, or for hockey, that is a sport that rarely ever saw a brand be launched in it and then be launched in other sports. So it was rarely the inaugural release for any sort of a cross-sport brand. And even when they weren't the first, they were rarely the second. They were usually kind of following behind the two main sports of baseball and football, and oftentimes with basketball as well. Well, this was a rare case where this actually preceded baseball, because Pinnacle was launched in football, and then hockey, and then baseball followed that, which meant that for hockey collectors, they got to collect Pinnacle before baseball collectors got to collect it. So a pretty rare opportunity for those collectors. And Pinnacle is the Score premium brand. This was launched in 1991 because in 1989, Upper Deck launched on the scene as the first premium brand. Action Pact was starting to be released, but it was a test set. So it wasn't until 1990 when we started to see more of a proliferation of premium brands. But even at that point, while we did see Leaf in baseball and Skybox in basketball, and then of course Action Pact in football, over in hockey they only had Upper Deck. So by 1991, it was, everybody knew that they needed to get in on the premium brand, the game, primarily because Hoops had done it with Skybox and Donruss had done it with Leaf. So of course everybody needed to join in. And in hockey, the big question was, okay, well, what are we going to see? And they did see Pro Sets Platinum. That was released there. Topps released Stadium Club. But for Score, they knew they needed to have a premium brand, and Pinnacle was their release. And so for the 1991 release, that meant that in hockey, they got to have Pinnacle as one of their brands. And Score was launching Pinnacle as a direct competition for Upper Deck. It was kind of like they had narrowed their sights on that particular brand. And so the card stock was very similar. I think the Pinnacle cards are a little glossier, but the rest of the card design looks like a more grown-up attempt at a card. I mean, more grown-up than anything else. Leaf wasn't even this conscientious of trying to make a card that looked like it was supposed to be a really sophisticated card. The card, unfortunately, because of that, didn't really read well with kids. It was trying too hard, and they'd have to scale it back and really refine it in 1992. But the 91 card is a very impressive card. White border around the outside, a black inner border, and that black inner border really enunciates the images. And plural is a key element because they don't have the portrait on the back, they have the portrait on the front, which, if you know anything about the history of Score, is actually really ironic. But they have an action shot of the front, and then they also have an action portrait on the back. Neither of those action shots is very big. That's kind of the big problem that this card has, is it's really playing a lot of tricks, but it doesn't really have that big overpowering quality that most cards tend to try to have. So this is that card that you get to complete your collection of great cards of your player. This is not a card that you start your collection off with. This is an integral part of the overall collection. It's pretty impressive, the whole concept of it. But the design of the card is very busy, but there's one element of the card that surprisingly stands out very distinctly from everything else, which is the two color bands. And those color bands are team colors. So when you look at one player and then another player from another team, another player from another team, once you get a couple of those showing up, the color really stands out on these cards in a way that's very distinct, because you had Pro Set over in football that was all about team color. But past that, Tops had a little bit of team color, Upper Deck had a little bit of team color, Score had a little bit of team color. You'd see it a little bit here and there, but it was always buried in the card. Here, it is subtle until you start to get multiple cards, and then the team color stands out very strong, and it works really well for fans. So it is a very well conceived, complex card that was trying too hard and would need to refine things. But when you look at the card back, there are two things of note. And the first one is you'll notice that, well, Ed Bellafor, he played for the Blackhawks, so what in the world is the blue band there for? Well, the blue band is there because this is the US release of cards. And the US release that has a blue color theme. So that upper box on the back is the US release theme. For the Canadian release, well, they have a red box up there. And then also all the text is in French. In fact, this is not a bilingual card, this is a French language card. So the Canadian release cards are French language. The whole card is French language, which means that on the front, even the position is in French. But the other thing of note is down at the bottom, there's that little gray box that has kind of a weird pattern in the middle of it, and that is an authenticator. Well, it is an anti-counterfeiting measure. And the whole point is that when Upper Deck launched in 1989, they put holograms on every single card. And that was a guarantee that nobody could duplicate these cards, so that you knew that this card was authentic. Well, when Pinnacle was launched in 1991, they did the same thing, but they did it with this box. And there's a special lens, an authentication lens, that you could get. And if you use that lens in one direction, it shows it kind of a rainbow kind of color effect. If you do it in the other direction, you see the word Score. So the authenticator lens is an opportunity for these cards to be a guarantee of authenticity all the way throughout. And Pinnacle used it right from 1991 all the way through to 1998 when they closed out. It was standard bill of fare for them, just like the holograms were for Upper Deck. And those authenticator lenses, in case you're curious, you could get them from card shops. You could order one. You could also get them in the releases, the special releases that they would do from time to time in the years that would follow. So they would show up here and there, but it wasn't that hard to get them if you wanted to bother to get one. So that was the design for the cards. Now, all of the veteran cards are done this way. The rookie cards are done slightly different, where instead of having a black box on the inside, they have green. And they don't have team color, they have yellow. That's the theme for all of the cards for the rookies. They also don't list the team on the front, but they do have a team logo on the back. So on the front, they just say rookie, or a similar word for those frozen fan friends that we have up north. And then obviously the position is also in French, and then on the card back, all the text is in French. So that is the Canadian release of the Canadian version of the same cards. And then they do also have one veteran card that is not at all a veteran card, which is a card for Eric Lindros. So Eric Lindros was supposed to be the next big thing. And Score jumped in and they started an agreement with him, so he was their guy, their spokesman. And so over in Score and then also in Pinnacle, they made sure to include him in sets with special cards. In the case here with the 1991 Pinnacle card, they have him for the team, the Canadian national team. And so this is, it's not a Flyers card, it's a Canadian national team card, where you'll notice that with the French language version, it still says Canadian national team. They didn't change the name on it for, I don't know why. But, well, I guess the Canadian national team never bothered to have a French name parallel. They just did that as the standard. At any rate, on the card back, you'll notice something. You still have the blue for the US, you have the red for the Canadian release, but they both have a big Canadian flag on it because that's the team affiliation that he has. So understand, if it has a blue band at the top, even though it has a Canadian flag, that is the US version. So that is what they did for the regular player cards, but also the subsets. Most of the subsets are the same that they did in football, starting with game winners. And this is basically players who kind of prop up the rest of the team, really hold them up and move them forward. This is a very busy card with text on either side. which does not work well with the very busy background behind the player, so the player kind of gets lost. I wish they'd rethought this card, but this is the way they did it. And you can see with this card that, well, there's something missing on it, which is the fact that there is no red parallel to this card. There's nothing different about the Canadian release versus the American release, the US release. And for the subset cards, that's pretty much the case. You've got to pay attention to the text to figure out which one is which. I wish they'd done something that was more distinct between them, but for the subset cards, you've really got to pay attention to find out if it's the US release or the Canadian release. And then they also have one subset that is very different from what they did over in football, and that is their Good Guys cards. And the Good Guys cards looks at players who have an extracurricular involvement in the community. Basically, it's that. They have some cause that they work with, that kind of a thing. So this is something we would rarely see in cards. We would have like the NFL Man of the Year, or we would have in basketball every once in a while they would do something with players doing community outreach. It was very rare that we would see it because nowadays we know about when J.J. Watt goes and does some hurricane funding relief, fundraising. We'd see that kind of thing now, but at the time it was rare to see this. So hockey took the opportunity to make Pinnacle took the time to make this set for hockey, where it has these players with very austere black cards with an artistic design of a tuxedo suit element, and then the picture of the player, or the artistic rendering of the player above that. But it gives us the ability to see a number of players who were all doing this kind of outreach. Pretty cool. Then they had a set called Technicians, and Technicians is, I love this subset. It's basically looking at players who have some really great skill, and it's kind of breaking it down. But the thing that's distinct is that on the front, they start off with a picture, a photo, and if they fade it down into a blueprint or a technical drawing down at the bottom. Now, what I love about this is that being a draftsman, this is just, I wish that there were more cards that took advantage of this opportunity. This is one of the rare ones, so it is pretty cool. But we would see like some blueprint cards in around 2000 in various places. But this is a very distinct card because it stands out so well because of the fresh idea of the design on the front and how distinct it looks. They also had a set called Idols, and this is a set that looks at a current player and then whoever their hero growing up was. And where this is fun, so you have a small shot of the current player and then a big sepia shot of the legend. What I like about this is that they do occasionally have, like Wayne Gretzky may show up in one of these sets, but for the most part it's legends who you aren't necessarily too familiar with, because normally you're going to hear about Orr, you're going to hear about Hull, or you're going to hear about the really big names through the years. In this case, we're seeing more secondary players whose names are not rolling right off our tongues, which gives us a really good idea of how these players, so many of these players have a major impact on various kids growing up, either as fans or as young players who are building their way up. So it is cool to see the new and distinct names that tend to show up in this card set. Pretty cool. And then the last subset is Sidelines, or Pro Sidelines for 1991. And Sidelines looks at players with their actual extracurricular activities. This could be a business that they own, this could be a job that they have, like maybe they're a lawyer, or it could just be a hobby. But the cards are very distinct, where they have a black and white shot at the bottom, and then they have a very vibrant color shot of, well, a picture at the top that reflects whatever the theme is for whatever extracurricular activity that they particularly have. And that's the set. So, like I said, they had a Canadian release and a US release, and the cards are identical in terms of the numbers, the cards that are placed in there, all of that, except one is French language, and it's also red themed, and the other is all in English with a blue theme, and that's the way that they did it. But there is one thing to add to, well, there are two things to talk about. One thing to add specifically to the set that's very different from the football release, which is that in football, they had no inserts. But that's the only set Pinnacle ever made with no inserts. When they got around to hockey later in the year, they started an insert that is called Pinnacle B. Now the B refers to the fact that the numbers are B1 through B12. But we would know this better as Team Pinnacle. This is the very first Team Pinnacle set, released in packs. The cards are they do the same thing that the regular Team Pinnacle sets that we would know in the future what they do, where they have the 6 starters of the Wales Conference All-Star team, and then they also have the 6 starters of the Campbell Conference team. So cards B1 through 6 and B7 through 12, 2 different All-Star teams, 1 of each player. But where in later releases of Team Pinnacle it would be a player on one side and a player on the other, here they're all standalone. Every single player has his own card. And the cards are completely black and white with one distinct exception. And you may be looking at Chris Chelios here and saying, oh, okay, so Blackhawks, so that's the reason it's red. Well, no, that's the Canadian release. But the Mario Lemieux card, that's the US release with a blue box. So they do have separate boxes for the Canadian release and the US release, which means there are 12 cards in the set, but there are 24 cards if you want to collect them all. So that is the insert set, and that is actually the beginning of Team Pinnacle. But the other thing I wanted to throw in here is they also had a promo panel for the set. I believe they only did one, but it's got Tony Granato on it for the main star. And I wanted to note this because over in football, they had a whole bunch of these. In hockey, I believe they only did the one. So that is what they did for 1991-92 Pinnacle Hockey. And like I said, I'm going to do 92-93 separately. That's going to be its own video. It's wonderful to see how things changed and evolved from 91 to 92. And it's, yeah, so that's going to be fun to look at. So I'll look at that separately. So if you haven't subscribed to my channel, I do urge you to do so. And definitely check out my other videos. I've already done Pinnacle for football and for baseball. So I'm just getting into the hockey cards here with this set. So definitely check out the other videos. And yeah, thank you very much for watching.